Item of business, a statement by Aileen Campbell on Ministerial Statement, Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan, Second Year Progress Report. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Aileen Campbell. For up to 10 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Tackling child poverty is at the very heart of this Government's ambition, and today I have published the second annual progress report due under the Child Poverty Scotland Act 2017. This details our progress in the reporting year 2019-20 in delivering the range of actions committed through Every Child, Every Chance, our first Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan, and considers our progress against the challenging targets that were agreed unanimously by this Parliament. As members will be fully aware, much of this report and the actions I've described relate to the period before the outbreak of coronavirus and therefore before the nationwide lockdown and significant restrictions placed on everyone's lives. This resulted in the delay to this progress report, and of course COVID-19 will also have an impact on poverty levels. And I'll come back to that shortly, but let me provide some details from our comprehensive report first. The report analyses the latest child poverty statistics, which were published in March and covered the period 2018-19, the first year of our delivery plan. The statistics highlight that relative child poverty levels, once housing costs are taken into account, are 7 percentage points lower than the UK average. However, the fact remains that almost a quarter of children in Scotland were living in poverty in that year, and that's absolutely unacceptable. The figures also show slightly lower child poverty levels across 3 of the 4 target measures in the Act, which is welcome, particularly so because the independent projections we published alongside the delivery plan had anticipated sharp increases in rates because of UK government welfare cuts. New estimates published today highlight that we have increased our investment targeted at children living in low-income households by £144 million to an estimated £672 million in 2019-20. And this is part of an estimated £1.96 billion directed at low-income households through a range of programmes, again an increase of £554 million. Presiding Officer, our approach remains to focus on the 3 key drivers of child poverty reduction, an approach that has been strongly supported by stakeholders. And let me give a few examples from our report on where our action is making a difference to people's lives. Maximising income through social security is the first of these key drivers, which is why we have increased support from social security across the early years through Best Start Grant and Best Start Foods. The Best Start Grant, early learning and school age payments were introduced in 2019-20 and offer, through a £250 grant, entirely new support to help families with children, helping them to buy the essentials that they need around the time their child starts nursery or school. More than 75,000 payments were made to families on low incomes through the 3 elements of Best Start Grant, backed by an investment of £21 million in 2019-20. By comparison, in 2017-18, the UK Government only awarded 4,300 Sure Start maternity grant payments with a total value of £2.4 million. This means that through Best Start Grant, we made 17 times more payments, worth almost 9 times more. Increasing family incomes from employment is another key strand of our approach. And in February, we launched our new Parental Employability Support Fund, backed by £12 million from our Tackling Child Poverty Fund. This service is delivered by local authorities in partnership with the private and third sector and focuses on providing flexible, person-centred employment support with a particular focus on tackling in-work poverty. The new service provides wraparound support and advice for parents, helping them to access the essentials that they need, including income maximisation, housing and childcare. And this will help parents to enter and progress in the labour market and to increase their take-home pay. We also continue to deliver activity to reduce household costs and support families in other ways. This includes delivering a further 9,286 affordable homes, including 6,952 for social rent, supporting 49,000 children through the expansion of early learning and childcare, and consulting on our draft out-of-school care framework, setting out a bold vision for school-age childcare. So we're proud of what has been delivered to date, and as the Poverty and Inequality Commission has highlighted, all this action will have a positive impact on the lives of children living in poverty. And that's why we'll continue to deliver with pace and scale required to lift children out of poverty, and to do this in light of the impact of coronavirus. So, Presiding Officer, the impacts of the virus on the health and well-being of individuals and on our economy have been unprecedented. The Office for National Statistics last week confirmed that the UK has officially entered the largest recession since records began. As financial support such as the UK Job Retention Scheme are removed, but the virus continues to take its toll on our everyday lives, the impacts on individuals and incomes will be even greater. And we also know that the effects of this awful virus have been felt unevenly across the country, and particularly keenly by the most disadvantaged people and communities, for example, women and young people. And we're committed to tackling this head-on and have already announced a £100 million package of employment measures, including a youth jobs guarantee, which is supported by our new Job Start payment for eligible young people who have experienced unemployment. And more than ever, the pandemic has highlighted the need to tackle child poverty and to support families in need. So let me turn to ways which we will do just that. Building on the holistic support model of our Parental Employability Support Fund, I'm confirming today that we will make a further £2.35 million available this financial year as a boost to the £5 million already allocated. This additional investment will focus on supporting local delivery in three key ways. First, £1 million will be invested to improve alignment with early learning and childcare with local parental employability support. Second, a further £1 million will be targeted at supporting disabled parents to progress towards employment and to compete for suitable jobs. And third, we will support our young parents who we know will be at a particular disadvantage as a result of the pandemic to get help and support on matters such as housing and income maximisation. This investment builds on the £100 million of employment measures announced by the Economy Secretary and will provide vital support to parents who may have seen their hours and earnings reduced as a result of COVID. Importantly, it will help young and disabled parents facing those additional barriers to the labour market to progress towards employment and access the opportunities available. And next, let me turn to how we will tackle the digital divide in Scotland, which has been shown in sharp focus during the pandemic when physical ways of staying in touch and contact were restricted. Earlier this week, I announced £15 million of new funding to expand our ambitious Connecting Scotland programme. Building on the success of the programme we introduced in May, over 30,000 low-income households will now receive support to get connected through access to a device, data, skills training and technical support. Our focus is on low-income families with children and young care leavers, and we'll work closely with our partners in local authorities, SCVO and the third sector to deliver this support by the end of spring 2021. And that's just one way we're increasing our support to families with children in the coming year. The Scottish Child Payment will provide £10 per child per week, and combined with the Best Start grant and Best Start Foods, this means that low-income families are eligible to receive over £5,200 of support for their first child by the time they turn 6. Importantly, this support continues with up to £4,900 available for each and every subsequent child, with no limit to the number of children supported, and that is unparalleled across the UK. However, the Parliament is aware that the Cabinet Secretary for Social Security and Older People updated the Parliament on the 1st of April about the major impact coronavirus would inevitably have on Scotland's social security. She committed to making sure we prioritise delivery of benefits in place, which has been done, and we have also now delivered the Job Start payment. In addition, she said that in recognition of the major role the Scottish Child Payment plays in tackling child poverty, the delivery of this important benefit would be prioritised, and we would aim to open applications for eligible under 6s by the end of this year, with first payments being made in 2021. This vital support is even more critical now as many families are struggling and facing hardship as a result of the pandemic. And despite the significant pressures from COVID-19, we've worked at pace and focused resources at ensuring that families get extra money in their pockets as soon as practically possible. Therefore, I am pleased to announce today that the Scottish Child Payment will open for applications for under 6s in November 2020, and the first payments will be made to eligible families from the end of February 2021. And that's only 2 months later than originally planned, which is a significant achievement given the unprecedented challenges for social security and other areas of life from COVID-19. Of course, we know that any further lockdowns or rise in the virus which could reduce staff numbers could risk this. And like many programmes, we're working in a time of pandemic and need to be aware that that continues to be a major challenge. So to conclude, Presiding Officer, the 2019-20 Progress Report makes clear the range of action underway across government to deliver reductions in child poverty. We've increased our investment for low-income families and we're on track to deliver the infrastructure for lasting change, not least through the new Scottish Child Payment. Whilst the coming year presents challenges in abundance, it also offers opportunities to learn from the response to COVID and to build forward better, reducing child poverty at every level across Scotland. As a government, we remain totally committed to delivering the action needed at pace and at the scale required. Working together, though, we will reduce and ultimately eradicate child poverty in Scotland. So thank you, Presiding Officer. I look forward to taking questions.
The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement, and I will allow around 20 minutes for questions. Be helpful if members who wish to ask a question were to press the request to speak buttons, and I call first of all Annie Wales.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement. I welcome a great many of the Cabinet Secretary's announcements, and like her, of course I'm concerned that around a quarter of our children are living in poverty, but it is encouraged to see the direction of travel in terms of action taken. With that said, I would like to ask about the early learning and childcare, which has been identified as a key pillar of the Scottish Government's plan, and in particular delay to the flagship policy of the 1140 hours of early learning funding. Now, ministers have said that this delay is due to the need to divert resources to tackle coronavirus. However, in reality, the Scottish Government was on track to miss this target before the pandemic occurred. In the report, ministers have confirmed this promise will not be delivered during this academic year and will only be done when they judge it reasonable to do so. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to provide some certainty for families across Scotland and set out a firm timetable for when it will be delivered?
Aileen Campbell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and welcome Annie Wells to her new role and look forward to working with her. However, from the get-go, she has got something wrong, and actually in March 2020, Audit Scotland confirmed that we were on track to deliver the 1,140 hours expansion in partnership with local authorities. So again, I would just urge Annie Wells, when she's getting used to her new brief, that was actually the facts of the matter, and will continue to work hard to continue to support families in this way. So we absolutely know and recognise just how critical early years provision is for families. It enables them, to women and parents, to access work. It enables them to access learning opportunities. It enables them to find that balance and support their household budgets. And that's what I saw today in Pennycook when I went to visit one of the early years centres there and heard from the mothers that I met directly about just how important it is. And that's why we'll continue to work hard. And I know that Marie Todd and the DFM will continue to work hard to make sure that we can get back on track with the expansion of hours. But we do know that from the 15th of July, as part of the Phase 3 of Scotland's route map, that early learning and childcare offers were reopened. There's many schools that have chosen to reopen alongside schools. And already through the pandemic and the lockdown, children of key workers and vulnerable children were able to access childcare through the lockdown period. And that's included children who usually access a free meal with their childcare setting. So we'll continue to work hard. At this point in time, it's very difficult to pinpoint a date, but the commitment was there, the funding was there. We'd already seen a number of local authorities and providers providing that additional hours, and we'll work with our local authorities partners to make sure that we can continue to deliver for families who so desperately need that support.
Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Child poverty across the world is too high, and it's a tragedy for every single child. In Scotland, we have a quarter of our children living in poverty, and we all agree that's unacceptable. Scottish Labour welcomes a lot of the Scottish Government's work alleviating poverty, the Best Start grant, the Sure Start maternity grant and the Employability Support Fund. Like the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, Shelter and others, we recognise the link between housing costs and poverty, and we believe a larger intervention is therefore needed. And the Joseph Rowntree's call for conditionality for employers to deliver on the living wage when they are in receipt of government money. Scottish Labour has one big question, one simple message for the government today, and that's around the Scottish Child Payment, because we believe it is the government's centrepiece policy on anti-poverty, and we regard the 6-month delay as significant. Those parents stand to lose £260 between now and February. We therefore call on the government to open applications as soon as possible and ask the Scottish Government to review the decision in the light of the fact that the furlough scheme is coming to an end. There unfortunately will be more families falling into poverty now. We recognise the difficulties in this, but we think February is too late. All we're asking for, Cabinet Secretaries, is that the Government review whether or not they can bring the child payment forward. It is your big policy.
Aileen Campbell.
I thank Pauline McNeill for her questions. The fact is that the delay, the 6-month delay that Pauline McNeill mentioned, that's not accurate. I said in my statement that it's been 2 months, that we would open up applications in November in that drive to make sure that we can get this key policy up and running as quickly as we can, given the significant pressures that have been faced through the agency as a result of COVID. So they have worked phenomenally hard, led by my colleague Shirley-Ann Somerville, to make sure that we can prioritise the Scottish Child Payment, and that's why we're able today to set out the timeframe by which we will make payments available to families. But I think as well, it's also important to note that we, through the process of the pandemic, didn't just leave a gap. We doubled the Scottish Welfare Fund. We've progressed Best Start foods. We've processed Best Start foods and Best Start grants. We've enabled families to access resource and help where we can and where we're able to. And we'll continue to do what we can for families to the best of our abilities. And that includes making sure that we get the timetable right for Scottish Child Payment, so that we don't also leave people waiting too long with a backlog. And that's why the timetable has been set out in the way it has been, so that we can do so to make sure that families get the applications in and get the payment at the point which they need it.
We move to open questions. If we could have succinct questions and answers, please, we'll get through them. First of all, Alison Johnson, followed by Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary is right to affirm that it's absolutely unacceptable that almost 1 in 4 children lives in Scotland in poverty, and these children have never needed our help more. The Cabinet Secretary may be aware that some studies have shown that for every £1 we invest in benefits advice, £25 can be received. But at the same time, thousands of poor Scots are still projected to miss out on the Best Start grant and the Scottish Child Payment, yet other payments like the child benefit have a much higher uptake. So what is the Scottish Government doing to ensure that every poor family is supported to claim the payments that they're entitled to?
Aileen Campbell.
So I think we've also had a good record, I think, of trying to make sure that we can maximise household budgets by making sure that people can get access to the support that they deserve and that they need and they are entitled to. So that's why we've over the last year, we've had the Money Talk team doing what they can to maximise household budgets. There has been other ways in which we've tried to make sure that people are getting access to the support that they deserve. And we will not be just sitting back and hoping that people apply. We'll be doing invites to people to make sure that they know that they're entitled to the Scottish Child Payment, to make sure that they do apply and that we can support them in that process. So that, fundamentally is a shift, and that's why that's driven by the fact that we want people to get access to the Scottish Child Payment, because it is so important, it's so vitally important to families with low incomes that they get access to this money, and that's why we'll be inviting them to apply and doing so in a proactive way, as opposed to waiting for it just to happen, because of the points that Alison Johnson made are so critical.
Alex Cole-Hamilton, to be followed by Bob Doran.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Access to funded childcare can mean the difference between a family making a living and keeping it. And as we've heard several times today, the delay to the rollout of the 1,140 hours is only going to perpetuate that cycle of child poverty. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary two things? Given that the science behind this was the decision to delay the rollout of the 1,140 hours was based on the science of March, when was the science behind its delay reviewed last? And secondly, given that funded childcare on a universal basis doesn't work for everybody, will she revitalise the Maclean Commission review of funded childcare and look at some of the flexibility options in that report?
Aileen Campbell.
Thank you, and I recognise the real interest that Alex Cole-Hamilton has had in this issue for a long time. In fact, when he was in his previous role, we worked when I was Children's Minister, so I know that it's been long-standing, his interest in making sure that we do the best for our children. As I set out to Annie Wells, we unfortunately, and regrettably, the result of the pandemic meant that the 1,140 hours hasn't happened in the timescale that I think everyone had hoped for. But we were on track to deliver it, and we're continuing to work with local authorities to ensure that all 3- and 4-year-olds and eligible twos can access their statutory entitlement to 600 hours from August this year, and we'll continue to work hard to ensure that we can move to support them to access the 1140 hours as quickly as possible. But that's not just the totality of our work, and I know within the Child Poverty Plan as well, and work that we've been doing to try and maximise the impact of that, to align our parental employment support along with access to that childcare, to make sure that we can deliver flexibility, to make sure that we can really make this work for families, because of the points that you made around making sure that families can actually get the work and employment opportunities that this policy was designed to enable, along with ensuring that the actual quality is there for the individual children as well. So I've set out in the report some of the areas of activity. There is also continuing work across government to make sure that this can deliver at pace. But I will endeavour to look at some of the points around the science that Alec Cole-Hamilton raises and get back to him on some of those specifics.
The first two backbench questions and answers took over long. We're never going to get through these unless people have a thought for their colleagues. So can I call Bob Doris to be followed by Jeremy Balfour?
Yeah, thank you, Presiding Officer. I would absolutely welcome further details of how COVID-19 has impacted delivery of the Scottish Child Payment. But, Presiding Officer, in doing so, can the Cabinet Secretary comment on whether there is now sufficient capacity and resilience within the delivery team that the Scottish Child Payment will be delivered under this revised timetable, delivering vital cash should there be another local or, heaven forbid, Cabinet Secretary, another national lockdown?
Aileen Campbell.
Yeah, and I outlined in my statement that while we set out the timetable as we hope it will progress, and we're working hard to progress in that way, that inevitably when you're in a pandemic such as we are, that sometimes there will be inevitably, or hopefully not though, spikes in the virus or further decisions that have to that may impact on different policies. But I can assure the member that we would make sure that successful applicants would not lose out financially even if there were a delay to their payments beyond February. But we unfortunately do need to recognise that we are operating in a climate of uncertainty. We're working hard to make sure that we can deliver to that timescale. But again, I give him an assurance that we would make sure that any applicants don't lose out financially.
Jeremy Balfour, followed by Ruth Maguire.
Cabinet Secretary, I noticed there is a 2-month delay before the Best Start Service for Scottish Child Payment comes into play. Would you use something like the Best Start grant for that 2-month period to increase that amount for 2 months to help those most vulnerable with that payment, with that 2-month delay?
Aileen Campbell.
I think that, and I understand why Jeremy Balfour is asking that question, the point he makes. However, you know, some of these things in exploration are technically very difficult, and it's not possible to do some of those things. But I would also point to the fact that we've doubled the Scottish Welfare Fund, that there are ways in which we're trying to endeavour to support people financially through the progress of this pandemic to make sure that people are supported, and will continue to do that.
Ruth Maguire, followed by Rhoda Grant.
Presiding Officer, good quality affordable homes, as well as being good for health, also support valuable local jobs, a good example of creating a wellbeing economy. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline what plans there are to ensure our affordable housing programme meets these aims and continues to contribute to eradicating child poverty?
Aileen Campbell.
And Ruth Maguire makes an excellent point there. We will be setting out our Housing to 2040 strategy later on this year, precisely because of the point that she makes, that housing is much more than bricks and mortar. It actually hits across a number of my colleagues' portfolio aspirations. It hits the aspirations set out in the MPF, and in the most recent report in year 2018-19, relative child poverty after housing costs was 7 percentage points lower in Scotland than the UK average. That's a significant impact delivered by housing, and again articulates just why it's so important that we continue to progress affordable housing across the country.
Rhoda Grant, followed by Rona Mackay.
Constituents are telling me that children entitled to free school meals are receiving very little to eat for lunch in school due to COVID restrictions. One told me a child received a quarter sandwich and a little piece of cheese. For many children, a free school meal is the only hot, wholesome meal they'll receive all day. Will the Scottish Government now legislate for a right to food, and will they also ensure that all children receive an adequate, wholesome school meal now?
Aileen Campbell.
Yeah, thank you, Presiding Officer. We have taken very proactive steps over the course of the last 5 months to make sure that food insecurity is tackled. And I think from memory, that's to date we've committed over £100 million to that, and that included also making sure that young people could access free school meals over the summer months, precisely because of the points that you've raised about making sure that people can get nutritious meals when they need it, because it may be the only point when they can access food. So I'm concerned to hear about those reports that Rhoda Grant has mentioned. I would be quite keen to know a bit more if she would be able to engage with us on that, because we see free school meals as really important. That's why this government legislated to give primaries 1 to 3 free school meals. It's why we've committed to ensuring that we tackle food insecurity, and it's why we take a rights-based approach. And all of that together shows, I think, our commitment to making sure that people don't suffer the challenges of food insecurity, which of course come back to poverty, and that's why we need to tackle it in the round.
Rona Mackay, followed by Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary expand on what impact COVID-19 has had on plans to tackle child poverty, not only for the Scottish Government, but also local authorities, organisations and the third sector who work in this area?
Aileen Campbell.
Thank you. While some of our previous child poverty plans developed before the pandemic may have been put on hold, we are continuing to work to support families that are impacted by poverty. And that's why, for instance, back in March, we recognised very early on that it would be people who are most financially vulnerable that would be impacted most, which is why we committed the £350 million community response to the pandemic. It's why we've committed to cover the cost of free school meals over the course of the summer holidays. It's why we've committed £110 million to food insecurity over the course of the pandemic. So while some of the policies that we developed before the pandemic had been paused, it has certainly not stopped the effort to support people going forward. And again, what we can learn from that and about what has worked will be absolutely critical to enhance our work going forward, making sure that we work collectively with local authorities, third sector and the communities which have shown remarkable resilience over the last 5 months.
Alexander Stewart, followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the extra funding in the statement, which will be targeted at supporting disabled parents to progress towards employment and to compete for suitable jobs. However, in reality, an employment gap already existed prior to this pandemic. Therefore, what assurances can the Government provide to protect these individuals in the job market, and how will we measure that this money is going to close the disability employment gap?
Aileen Campbell.
Thank you. And Alexander Stewart raises, again, very critical points. Disabled families are one of our priority families. We know that they suffer disproportionately levels of poverty, and that's why we need to target our support in the right way to make sure that that can be closed. And that's, again, why we want to provide extra support, wraparound support, key worker support to people who require that extra bit of help to access job opportunities, to close that gap as best we can. And that's why we've been working very closely with Fiona Hislop as well around the wider employability package to make sure that in amongst the job challenges that will exist, that we don't see those vulnerable people further left behind, which is not something that we don't want to see. So while we've announced some money today, I would look at the bigger, wider package to make sure that that collective effort goes towards tackling the problems that Alexander Stewart rightly raises.
Fulton McGregor, to be followed by Mark Griffin.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. While the economic impact of COVID-19 is at the forefront of everyone's mind, we mustn't forget that worsening poverty levels are only likely to be exacerbated by the impending Brexit. Can the Cabinet Secretary tell the Chamber what work has been done to model the impact with both of these with regards to inequalities and poverty in Scotland?
Aileen Campbell.
Fulton McGregor is right to point out that while we've been coping as a country with the impact of a pandemic, that on the horizon there are going to be some further challenges ahead, not least Brexit. And in January, earlier this year, we published analysis on the social impacts of Brexit, and that highlighted that food and energy price rises after Brexit, especially in a no-trade deal, were likely to hit the poorest households hardest. A no deal also, we had outlined how that would hit particularly low-paid people in low-skilled sectors, employing a high number of people in low income. So we already knew and had done a lot of analysis about just how negatively impactful Brexit would be, and all those concurrent risks altogether mean that we're going to have to work even harder to make sure that we can protect people who require even more support. And again, that's why we would make those calls to the UK government to do make some of the changes to the welfare system that exacerbate some of that. They've shown through the pandemic that they can be swift and they can make changes, and those are welcome, but they're not big enough and they're not wide enough, and they need to continue. So we'll continue to work with the UK government on that and push as hard as we can. But Brexit is undoubtedly a huge challenge, and we'll continue to make sure that we understand that as best we can.
Mark Griffin, to be followed by Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The DWP sends data on exactly who qualifies for the Scottish Child Payment on a weekly basis. In light of that, why then can't the payment be made automatically and straight away?
Aileen Campbell.
Well, we have set out the time frame. It was always going to require time to get this in place to make sure that we could get to the children and the families that are entitled to this. We've set out that we're going to be proactive in trying to ensure that people apply for it, and also that there's lots of technical reasons why some of that isn't quite as possible as I think Mark Griffin suggests, but we are endeavouring to work at pace to make sure that we can get the child payment into families' pockets as quickly as possible because of the impact that this will have. The game changer that when we announced it last year, that children's charities said and described it would be. So, there's no reluctance on our part. We want to get this done as quickly as possible. It's just been that there has been that the consequence of the pandemic has knocked the timescale that we wanted, but we're continuing to work at pace to make sure that families can get that into their pockets as quickly as possible.
And the last question is from Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. With 1 in 4 children in my constituency living in poverty, can the Cabinet Secretary outline what future plans the Scottish Government has for tackling food insecurity, in particular with any measures that will actually benefit families?
Aileen Campbell.
Thank you. So I think in some of those questions we kind of described why food insecurity is intolerable in Scotland, particularly when we are blessed with such natural resources and phenomenal producers. It just seems ironic that food insecurity continues to proceed. And of course that's rooted back to a lack of income caused by the 3 drivers of child poverty. So that again is why the Scottish Child Payment will be absolutely critical. It'll put more money back into people's pockets. It's why we advocate the cash first approach to local authorities who are helping support families with entitlement to free school meals, because it gives them the autonomy and the agency to be able to tackle that in their own terms. And it's why through the course of the pandemic that we invested over £110 million to tackle food insecurity caused by the crisis. So we will continue to take the dignified cash-first approach. We'll continue to work with our local authorities. We'll continue to work with the third sector and communities to properly tackle food insecurity. But ultimately, it does come back to not having the means to purchase the very basic in life, which is food. And that's why child payment is important, but it's also why the UK government needs to really look closely about what they do and how they support families that don't have the financial means to afford food.
That concludes questions on the Ministerial Statement on Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan, Second Year Progress Report, and we'll move on to the next item of business. And the next item of business is consideration of 2 Parliamentary Bureau motions. May I ask Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move motions 22456 on committee membership and 22457 on substitution on committees.
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question on these motions will be put at decision time, to which we now come. There is one question to be put as a result of today's business, and I propose to ask a single question on the 2 Parliamentary Bureau motions. If any member objects, please say so now. No member has objected. Therefore, the question is that motions 22456 and 22457 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motions are therefore agreed. That concludes decision time, and this meeting is closed.